Ninetails, Fish Creek, 2 maces of mock strawberry, 1 tail, 6 maces of sacred bamboo, 4 maces of oleander. Qin Mu brought Hu Linge to the treasury and handed up the prescription to buy the medicinal ingredients he needed. He then informed Hu Linge, "This time I'm going to create a drug called Lost Fragrance, which is a kind of anesthetic. Grandpa Apothecary had once used it to knock out a flood dragon. That bull may be strong, but this can definitely knock it out. However, creating this drug requires a special pill furnace and no negligence can be tolerated." Hu Linge asked curiously, "Why is that so? The fragrance that this drug gives off can even knock out a flood dragon, let alone the apothecary that's making it." Qin Mu smiled. "If the pill furnace isn't sealed up, the fragrance would travel out after the drug is done. I'm afraid to even great divine arts practitioners of celestial being realm would fall head first if they happen to stand in the path where the fragrance is carried through. I don't have this kind of sealed pill furnace, so I need to borrow one from Hall of Supreme Healing." Suddenly, he heard a familiar voice. "Little divine physician, where are you going?" Qin Mu looked towards the source of the voice and smiled. "So, it's Imperial Physician Q. That's right, you're a directorate. I need to call your teacher Q." Imperial Physician Q immediately said, "Don't say it this way. I'm too ashamed. Little divine physician, I have a lecture this afternoon and will be talking about medicinal knowledge with the scholars. Since you're a divine physician, why don't you substitute me to give a lecture?" Qin Mu broke out in laughter and said, "I'm only a student. How can I give a lecture? Furthermore, I still have something to do during the afternoon lesson and might not be able to attend. I plan to refine a furnace of drug, which would be used in the afternoon." Imperial Physician was slightly disappointed, but his eyes suddenly lit up. "You are refining pills?" Qin Mu smiled. "It can't be considered refining pills, it's just refining drugs." Imperial Physician Q's gaze twinkled. "Little divine physician, may I observe?" Qin Mu hesitated for a moment and nodded his head. "I plan to borrow the pill furnace in Hall of Supreme Healing, and if you want to observe, we can go together." Imperial Physician Q was greatly delighted and smiled. "Little divine physician, you can go ahead to Hall of Supreme Healing first, and I'll be back. Fast." After he had finished saying, he went off like the wind. Qin Mu walked over to Hall of Supreme Healing, and before he even reached the front of the hall, Imperial Physician Ku was already waiting for him in front of the hall. Other than him, there were also Imperial Physician Yu, and the rest of the Imperial Physician Bureau. They all wore an expression of excitement. Qin Mu was bewildered. He had only wanted to refine an ordinary anesthetic. Was there a need to muster all the Imperial physicians? "Little divine physician, quick!" The few Imperial physicians hurried him as they babbled on. "Do you need to activate the underground fire great furnace?" "We can be your assistants." "What medicinal ingredients are you using? What is the order of the medicinal ingredients? When should we be gentle and when should we be fierce? When you execute the hand techniques, how should the vital qi circulate?" Qin Mu walked into Hall of Supreme Healing along with them and saw a huge great furnace directly. The number of pills that this pill furnace can refine might take one at least 2 to 3 years to eat them up. This should be a furnace of military use or to refine some world-shaking spirit pills. Other than that, there were other pill furnaces of all sizes, and there were rune formations under these pill furnaces, which connected to the underground fire that was 10,000 yards beneath the grounds. When the underground fire was drawn out, it could be used to refine pills. "Is there a sealed furnace?" Qin Mu inquired. "Little divine physician over here." Imperial Physician, you quickly led him to a stone furnace in Hall of Supreme Healing and smiled. "This furnace is the sealed furnace. Little divine physician can check if it's usable." Qin Mu's eyes lit up and saw that this stone furnace was directly carved out of jade and stone. The top and bottom were emptied out with 8 divinatory trigrams and 5 elements situated on the inside. The furnace had no air vents, and it could be made airtight by closing the top and bottom together and giving a turn. Even if the pill exploded in the furnace, it wouldn't be able to break open this pill furnace. Usable. Qin Mu lifted open the furnace and inspected it thoroughly, before placing the herbs according to the order in the square boxes of the 8 divinatory trigrams and 5 elements. The square boxes of these 8 divinatory trigrams and 5 elements all had their own sequences and would open up when they reached a certain timing. This way, the medicinal ingredients in the square boxes would fall into the furnace, and there would be no need to open up the pill furnace to throw the herbs in. He placed the herbs and immediately gave a clap with his palms, drawing out the underground fire from the rune formation on the ground, calcining the stone furnace. Houlinger had no interest in refining drugs, thus she started to look around. Meanwhile, the old and white-haired imperial physicians gathered around to observe with great interest, unable to take their eyes off. Imperial physician Yu saw Qin Mu's hand technique, and his eyes lit up while he exclaimed in admiration, "This hand technique had really reached perfection and is unimaginably good. Little divine physician, why does your hand technique require to dot 13 marks consecutively?" Qin Mu replied, "Purple pellet stone is a precious stone, and medicinal properties are concealed inside the precious stone. It's much harder to extract its medicinal properties out. Therefore, I had to dot 13 marks to be able to extract out its medicinal properties. My cultivation is slightly weaker, and if teachers' cultivations are dense, there's no need to have 13 marks. As long as you extract out the medicinal properties, you can stop." The few old imperial physicians nodded their heads and immediately noted down, as Qin Mu refined the drug and conversed with them at the same time. It was just that the few old imperial physicians had a lot of questions, thus he asked very little and was always explaining the medicinal properties and pill refinement techniques to these old imperial physicians. "This is the dragon and tiger mutual helping hand. Am I right?" The expression of Imperial Physician Ku suddenly changed and cried out, "A hand technique that was already long lost." The other 3 Imperial Physicians revealed an astonished expression, and they stared intensely at Qin Mu's palms, which were moving up and down, trying to memorize Qin Mu's hand technique. The white-haired Imperial Physician Yu muttered, "The dragon and tiger mutual helping hand has been lost for 200 years. Never would I expect to see this legendary pill refinement hand technique from little divine physician. Am I dreaming? If all of you want to learn it, I can teach you when I'm free, but recently I don't have the time." Qin Mu had now reached the crucial part of refining the drug, and he couldn't be distracted. Dragon and tiger mutual helping hand was only one of the few hundreds hand techniques Apothecary had taught him, and it wasn't really special. He felt that it wasn't much imparting it out. The most important point of pill refinement was to be proficient in medicinal knowledge. Hand techniques and everything else was just supplementary. Be that as it may, hand techniques were, however, of utmost importance to these imperial physicians. Other than hand techniques, there were also prescriptions which were the long-sought treasures of countless of people studying medicine. If they got their hands on a solitary prescription, they would definitely view it as a precious treasure and not tell others easily. This was different from what Apothecary had taught Qin Mu. Apothecary absolutely didn't believe in prescriptions and hand techniques. What he taught most to Qin Mu was medicinal knowledge. He had yet thought before how powerful the things Apothecary had taught him were, and always felt they were ordinary things. Therefore, the astonishment of these imperial physicians made him felt unfathomable. At this moment, Qin Mu had already prepared to collect the drug, and his hand techniques became faster and faster, dazzling everyone's eyes. In just a short moment, the few imperial physicians saw a dozen kinds of long-lost hand techniques that were even complicated than dragon and tiger mutual helping hand. As the many hand techniques flashed by, every hand technique brought around different forms of the underground fire's transformations. Before the few imperial physicians could even note them down, Qin Mu had already pulled back his hands and waited silently beside the stone furnace. When the stone furnace had cooled down, Qin Mu's vital qi suddenly transformed into black tortoise vital qi, and his palms became cooler and cooler. Pressing his palms onto the stone furnace, a layer of frost soon formed on the walls of the furnace. A moment passed, and Qin Mu made the few imperial physicians, as well as Houlinger, fall back. He then held his breath and carefully opened up the stone furnace. At the bottom of the furnace, there was a thin layer of pink fog. Chin Mu's done hand to execute Black Tortoise Vital Cheetah cooled down this fog, while his other hand took out a small jade bottle. His Vital Cheat transformed into a guiding method in the bottle and drew the fog at the bottom of the furnace into the jade bottle. He immediately tightened the bottle cape and he still wasn't a tease. He then used Black Tortoise Vital Cheer transform into a lump of black ice, which sealed the mouth of the bottle before giving out a sigh of relief. I have refined the drug I needed. Chin Mu thanked the few Imperial physicians and smiled. Teachers, I still have matters to attend to, so I won't disturb you. As for the lesson in the afternoon. Imperial physician, Yu smiled. Just do what you have to do. From today onwards, there's no need for you to come for lessons if you are busy. If you have time, it will be enough if you can frequently come over to give us old men a few lessons and refine some pills. Chin Mu bid farewell and left. Just as he had left, the few old Imperial physicians immediately came together. Imperial physician, you had smiles of exultation and asked, everyone, did you note down all the medicinal ingredients? Imperial physician, Yu tremblingly replied, how could he hide it from us? I just need to sniff the smell, and I knew which medicinal ingredients they were. How much maces and tails also can't be hidden from my nose. How about the medicine formulation and the order of the 8 divinatory trigrams and 5 elements? Imperial physician Q smiled. Don't worry, I've noted them down. How about the hand techniques? The few old men smiled together. We have all memorized some, and by putting them together, we can restore his hand techniques. Imperial physician Q hesitated for a moment and said, however, when he was collecting the medicine, he asked us to stand far away, so I didn't note down the method he used to collect the medicine. Furthermore, we have no idea what medicine he refined, and if we refine it without careful consideration, collecting the medicine is an easy feat and won't be too troublesome. As for what medicine is it, we'll know it when we take a sniff after refining it out. The medicine that little divine physician has refined out would definitely be extraordinary. The few old Imperial physicians were in high spirits. Imperial physician Yu immediately went to the treasury to grab the medicinal ingredients, while the remaining old men washed the stone furnace, waiting for Imperial physician Yu to return. When he had returned, they immediately placed the medicinal ingredients into the square boxes of the 8 divinatory trigrams and 5 elements according to the sequence. The few old Imperial physicians supported one another and drew out the underground fire. Each one of them executed one or more kinds of hand techniques as they surrounded the stone furnace to refine the medicine. Not long later, many scholars had come to Hall of Supreme Healing for the lecture. It was just that the few old Imperial physicians had reached the crucial timing in refining the medicine, so they had no time to bother about it. During these few days, Imperial College was first blocked by Daozi of Dao Sect and then by Fozi of Great Thunderclap Monastery, resulting in many people getting injured. This made the scholars of Imperial College realize the importance of Hall of Supreme Healing. Now that Hall of Supreme Healing was giving a lecture, they naturally had to come and attend. All the scholars couldn't help exclaiming in admiration endlessly when they saw the unpredictable movements of these Imperial physicians. Hand techniques which were reaching perfection. Imperial physician Yu and the rest surrounded the stone furnace and continuously moved their feet, weaving past each other. They were like a few old butterflies fluttering to and fro around the furnace fire, and indeed had divine poise and sage-like features. Suddenly the elders stopped and they pulled back their hands, adjusting their breath while waiting for the stone furnace to cool down. Reaching this step, the few old Imperial physicians were all slightly hesitant. Imperial physician Q placed his hand on the stone furnace and said, "It seems like this is the hand technique." His hand pressed on it like this. Imperial physician smiled. "It's okay if we don't succeed. We'll just have to refine it once more. Let us open the furnace!" Imperial physician, you went forward and lifted up the furnace lid. A fragrance instantly assailed his nose, and he couldn't help smiling. And thud, Imperial physician, you collapsed onto the ground with a queer smile still hanging on his face. The smile was like a flower which had half bloomed as he only in time to smile halfway. Thud, thud, thud. You, Imperial physician, you also had smiles on their faces as they collapsed backward. Not far away, the scholars who were surrounding to observe all cried out in astonishment. Some of them wanted to go save people, while some wanted to escape. Suddenly, all the scholars felt as if their 4 limbs had vanished, and they collapsed onto the floor one after another. They not only felt their 4 limbs vanishing, even their eyes, nose, ears, and even head had vanished without a trace. Even their spirit embryos had suddenly become paralyzed and couldn't move. Their vital chi had also become rigid. Translator Ninetails. Editor, Fish Creek. The folk within the Hall of Supreme Healing have been struck by poison. A handful of scholars who happened to pass outside the hall instantly caught sight of the chaos within the Hall of Supreme Healing. One of them at once dashed out and bellowed at the top of his lungs, "I'll go summon the directorates. The rest of you, hurry inside and save them." The other 2 scholars immediately charged into the hall, and the moment the fragrance brushed their noses, they crumpled to the ground. Not long after, Monk Fa-Ching of the Hall of Azure Yang led several monks over, barged into the hall and shouted, "Quickly save!" Plop! Plop! The monks toppled one after another. Monk Fa-Ching's cultivation was deeper than theirs after all, so he managed to twist around and retreat. Yet when he reached the hall's entrance, he finally could not endure it any longer and collapsed right outside the threshold. "Monk Fa-Ching has been poisoned as well!" Several scholars hurried forward to rescue Monk Fa-Ching, but as soon as they suddenly caught that same fragrance, they too fell one after another. The surrounding scholars, seeing the scene, cried out for help while rushing over. Yet before they could even reach them, they all slammed to the ground with a dull thud, without the slightest warning. Meanwhile, Scholars' Residence, Divine Arts Residence, and Royalties Park had also received the news and hurried over. The directorates of the other halls likewise emerged to save people. In front of the mountain gate, some scholars who had heard of this unforeseen disaster even set aside their bout with Fozi and dashed up to rescue their fellow students. Chancellor Bashan also received the news and immediately flew to the front of the Hall of Supreme Healing, only to behold several hundred scholars and directorates strewn before the hall like fallen leaves. The fragrance of lost fragrance had already seeped out from the Hall of Supreme Healing and spread beyond its doors. Taoist Ling Yun and the rest of the directorates stood not far away, their expressions changing drastically. All at once, Taoist Shou Feng of the Hall of Array Elements strode forward, snatched at the wind with both sleeves, and said, "This poison is ferociously potent. Best to disperse this poisonous miasma so we can save people." Whoosh! 2 fierce gales burst from his sleeves and surged toward the Hall of Supreme Healing. Chancellor Ba Shan's expression changed violently, and he shouted with stern authority, "Don't blow!" Before Taoist Shou Feng could even react, the thick, heavy fragrance was blasted out of the Great Hall and scattered outward. Chancellor Ba Shan shouted again, "Hold your breath!" But it was already too late. The lost fragrance dispersed in every direction, and scholars collapsed one after another, their bodies rigid. Meanwhile, because the directorate's cultivation was dense, they only felt their limbs go numb, legs turning soft, vital chi growing sluggish, until they could not move at all. Chancellor Ba Shan had acted with foresight, and his cultivation was extraordinarily high. The instant he drew in even a trace of that fragrance, he immediately used his dense, vital spirit to force it out of his body. He swept his gaze across the scene and saw wave after wave of scholars falling. Crap! Is this the end of Imperial College? An icy sorrow spread through his heart. This fragrance would likely spread throughout the entire Imperial College. Those who could avoid paralysis were only a scant 10 to 20 people, experts of the celestial being realm and above, who could force the strange fragrance from their bodies. Imperial College was now the #1 sacred ground beneath the heavens, and yet everyone here was about to be knocked unconscious by this bizarre fragrance. Even if it was not truly the end, it was scarcely different from it. What kind of poison did those old scoundrels from the Hall of Supreme Healing refine this time? He did not know that lost fragrance was not a poison at all, but merely a kind of anaesthetic. After 2 to 4 hours, the medicinal energy of the anaesthetic would fade, and it would harm no one at that moment. A bottle gourd suddenly rose into the sky. With its mouth turned downward, a terrifying suction erupted from it. Sweeping from the top of the mountain to the bottom, the fragrance that had spread out was drawn into the gourd along with the air. Wild gales rolled across the mountain, and in no time the strange fragrance had vanished. Chancellor Barshan let out a sigh of relief. Luckily there's Grand Chancellor, and it didn't engulf the entire mountain. However, these people are probably... Tears welled in his tiger eyes as he looked at the countless corpses before the Hall of Supreme Healing. Suddenly a chuckle sounded by his ear. "Barshan, why are you crying when they are not dead?" Chancellor Barshan was stunned. He hurried forward and tested the breath of a corpse. It was indeed strong. The young patriarch came to his side, looked around with a frown, and said, "This looks like Poison King's handiwork. That's it. I know who did this. This little scoundrel. He's getting more and more out of control." Chancellor Barshan hesitated for a moment. "Grand Chancellor, I heard it was a few imperial physicians who had an accident while refining a medicine." The young patriarch sneered. "Those few imperial physicians of the Hall of Supreme Healing aren't capable of refining such a powerful anaesthetic. It must be that little brat who refined medicine in the hall and caused an accident, paralysing himself and even the scholars of the whole institution." Just as he said this, his eyes suddenly widened, staring fixedly at a nearby place. Chancellor Barshan was puzzled and followed his gaze, his own eyes opening wide as well. They saw only a young scholar winding around the Hall of Supreme Learning as he returned from the rear mountain. Both of his hands were dragging an incomparably sturdy, enormous green bull. The green bull was also paralysed. Its 4 hooves were tied together. With all 4 legs facing the sky, it was dragged along by that youth. Meanwhile, perched atop the bull's hooves, sat a pure white little fox, its fur spotless and without the slightest impurity. The young scholar saw the ground littered with corpses and was slightly stunned. When he saw Chancellor Barshan and the young patriarch, his face changed drastically, and he immediately flung away the green bull, snatched up the fox and turned to run. "My little bull! Chancellor Barshan immediately rushed over, catching the paralysed green bull with a pained, sympathetic expression. Then he shouted in fury, "Rascal! You knocked out my mount! I swear I won't let you off!" Before Chinmu could run far, he felt his collar tighten as the young patriarch grabbed him. The scenery before his eyes warped rapidly, and in the next instant he had appeared before the Hall of Supreme Healing, standing amid the ground filled with corpses. Chinmu became obedient at once, lowering his head as he looked at the white fox beside him. The white fox also became obedient, lowering her gaze to stare at her own furry front paws. The young patriarch smiled in such anger that he seemed at a loss for words, pointing at the corpses on the ground, silent for a long while. "Stand at the corner of the wall!" the young patriarch shouted after restraining himself for quite some time. Chinmu and Hu Linga walked over to the corner of the Hall of Supreme Healing, lowering their heads as they stood there. The young patriarch's expression was grim as he paced back and forth before the human and the fox, hands clasped behind his back. Suddenly he barked, "Who planted the poison?" Chinmu immediately answered, "That bull was paralysed by me. As for the scholars and chancellors, I've no idea." The young patriarch asked with a solemn face, "How to cure it?" Chinmu replied honestly, "There's no need to cure them. You just need to wait for a moment and they will recover." The young patriarch snorted coldly, raised a finger and scolded, "How many days have you been here since you entered Imperial College, and you've already turned the entire Imperial College upside down? Almost all the scholars of Scholars' Residence have been beaten by you, and almost all the houses in Scholars' Residence have been torn down by you, planting heads in walls and planting humans in the ground. Do you think I didn't know? You struck Directorate Lingyun down into the dust in front of the Emperor. And now you sedated Chancellor Barshan's mount, not to mention how you paralysed the Hall of Supreme Healing. You nearly paralysed everyone in this Imperial College. What's your next step going to be? Knock out everyone in the capital city?" Chinmu pondered for a moment and scratched his head. How big would the pill furnace have to be to refine out so much lost fragrance? What I mean is, the lost fragrance that knocked out all these scholars and chancellors was definitely not refined by me. The young patriarch was speechless with rage. Then explain yourself. Why did you paralyze Chancellor Bashan's mount? Chancellor Bashan walked over and asked curiously. That's right. Why did you paralyze my bull? Chinmu blinked innocently and said, I was fooling around with it. I planned to steal the vegetables from your vegetable garden. I've been eating too much oily food these few days, therefore I'd like to change my tastes. Chancellor Bashan was suspicious and asked, after you knocked out my bull, why didn't you go steal the vegetables and instead carried it and ran? Did you fancy the vegetables in my vegetable garden, or my bull? This. Chinmu lowered his head to look at the little fox standing with him in the corner. The little fox also couldn't think of an excuse. Bashan grew angry. No more excuse? How should I punish you? Grand Chancellor, he has just come up the mountain, and he already dared to eat my bull and even planted poison, nearly harming all the scholars in Imperial College. This boy can't be allowed to stay. The young patriarch gave a cough and said softly, Bashan, he is the disciple of Poison King. Chancellor Bashan jumped in shock. Poison King? Which Poison King? The young patriarch spoke softly. Which Poison King could it be? Of course, it's Jade Face Poison King. He's the Flower Alley divine physician who cured Empress Dowager. He's pretty good in curing illnesses to save people, and his poison isn't much inferior to Fu Yuanqing of Imperial Preceptor's Manor. A bone-chilling cold ran through Chancellor Bashan. He immediately shifted far away from Chinmu with a chuckle. Since my bull is fine, I'll let the matter drop. Grand Chancellor, I'll leave this to you. The young patriarch's head began to ache. Chinmu was good in everything, yet he was also good at tormenting people. Village chief and the rest had groomed him very well, and Patriarch was very pleased. It was fine if he tormented Imperial College, but if by any chance he tormented Heavenly Devil Cult too when he went there in the future, it would be utterly terrifying. Suddenly the young patriarch smiled and looked at him kindly. I still have 2 more months before I retire. Please don't create any more trouble. Can you be content with your lot for just these 2 months? Chinmu nodded and argued, I really didn't refine the lost fragrance that paralyzed Imperial College. The young patriarch beamed. Who was the one who passed around the prescription? Chinmu lowered his head. The young patriarch called Chancellor Bashan over. Bashan, come over. Chancellor Bashan stepped forward, and the young patriarch smiled. Watch him attentively for these 2 months. When I retire 2 months later, you can relax. What Grand Chancellor means is to. Chancellor Bashan moved forward and raised his hand in a downward chopping motion, wearing an inquiring expression. The young patriarch said with a smile that was not a smile, You think too much. He's a divine physician who cured Empress Dowager's illness. Furthermore, with just an anesthetic, he could paralyze the whole mountain. If you kill him, I'll kill you. So it was him. Chancellor Bashan felt scales fall from his eyes and said, I've long heard about the divine physician who came to the capital city. Never would I expect him to be this boy. It's not impossible for me to watch him, though I have a feral temper and I'm not used to staying on the mountain. The young patriarch smiled. Just bring him wherever you go. Chancellor Bashan understood. The young patriarch let out a murky breath and said, Don't just stand there. Carry out the scholars who were knocked out with the Chancellor and let them breathe in fresh air. Chinmu and Chancellor Bashan immediately went into the Hall of Supreme Healing and carried everyone out. More than half the scholars in Imperial College had been knocked out, and quite a few directorates had been knocked out as well. When the medicinal properties of lost fragrance faded, everyone regained consciousness one after another, though their heads still felt heavy, and they couldn't fully recover in a short while. The few old Imperial physicians of the Hall of Supreme Healing apologized to everyone, ashamed. However, their respect for Chinmu rose even further. Only now did they understand why Chinmu had told them to move back when he was collecting the drug. The medicinal energy of this lost fragrance was too powerful, and Chinmu had been worried it might leak out. Therefore, he had asked them to move farther away. This resulted in them being unable to see the method Chinmu had used to collect the drug, causing chaos. Luckily, it was only an anesthetic. If it had been a poison that killed with a sniff, then more than half the future elites of Eternal Peace Empire would probably have died just like that. Right at this moment, someone suddenly cried out in astonishment, "Fozi Foshin and Monk Jingming have left!"